All right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we're doing something that we have never done before, and that is look at a book instead of a movie. We are looking at screenwriter Charlie Kaufman's new book, Antkind. It's his first novel. And those of you who have listened to the show before probably know that I am a big Charlie Kaufman fan. Adaptation is my favorite movie. And if I was to sit here and make a list of my top 10 or 20 films, pretty much the rest of the films he has written exists somewhere in my top list of my favorite movies. So I'm a pretty big fan, and so when this book came about, I knew that I probably would end up wanting to do an episode on it, even though it's not a movie. And, you know, it's a story, and there's plenty of inspiration to be found within it. And joining me for a great, very long conversation is returning co-host Kris Krainock. He's a filmmaker. He's been on the show a bunch of times, but he hasn't been on since before all of this pandemic and shutdown and coronavirus and all that stuff. So it was great to have him back on. And, you know, I'm not a very big reader, so I was really happy to have Kris on because he has read a lot of the books that most likely did inspire Charlie Kaufman a little bit in the making of this one. Because for me, I can only really look at movies for the most part because I am not a big reader. We all have our shortcomings. Me, I can't keep an attention span for more than a couple of hours at a time at absolute most. And even then, I can barely get to an hour of reading at a time. So for me, reading is like a freaking chore, but I did my best. And because it is Charlie Kaufman, I was able to get through this thing, all 700 plus pages of it. And so I am looking forward to this conversation. It is a long one. It's a long book, and there's a lot of things being explored, and so there was a lot to talk about, and I really didn't want to edit it down. I could have, but I felt like it all needed to be in here. So, you know, if you haven't read the book yet, I do encourage you to. Charlie Kaufman has such a hard time getting things made in this world, and I want it to be a success, so he'll get to make more things. And of course, he's got his Netflix movie, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is coming out next month. I want him to get to make more movies, write more books. So go read this book and then strap in for a long conversation. We've got a lot to say. As always, I want to remind you to make sure to subscribe to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. So, without any further ado, let's get into this conversation about Antkind. Kris Krainock, you are finally back on the show, and we have a lot to talk about, my friend.
Yeah, I know everyone missed me so much. You were getting letters of outrage.
You should have seen them all. I had to. I had to make a separate folder just to keep it all clear and everything between all my Amazon purchases that I make while I'm sitting here in my house. How have you been, buddy?
Well, I'm good. Yeah, it's a crazy time, and as you're learning quickly that I'm not as technologically savvy as you'd imagine. I can run cameras.
Yeah, this whole conversation is held up by the fact that you still use Safari. What's going on here?
That's
buddy?
pretty deep. Yeah. That's a horrible thing you've just done. Release that to the world. No, the thing is, I can run a camera of pretty intense sophistication, but with computers, since I don't know. I have never learned them. You know, because I have editors I work with that have the really good, the good stuff that we need to make the films. And for me, I use like the oldest laptop imaginable, and also just a funny tidbit: the keyboard on my laptop broke, so I plugged in a separate keyboard. So now I just lug around a keyboard and a laptop, defeating the purpose of the laptop. That's me constantly. Yeah. I have like 30 wires hooked up right now because all the batteries don't last anymore because it's like 40-year-old computer. So that's me.
You know
that's
what, Kris?
how I'm doing.
You are a problem solver. That's what you are, my friend.
For sure. I'm the MacGyver of technological inadequacy, for sure.
So I do want to bring up one thing before we get onto the subject at hand, which is, of course, Charlie Kaufman's debut novel, Antkind. But I do want to mention that just as the quarantine started and all
Hmm.
this craziness with coronavirus, you and I were supposed to record an episode on King Kong after its what was it, 70th anniversary or
Oh, that's
something.
right.
I don't
Yes.
remember. Yeah, but I do hope to eventually get back to that one of these days. I just wanted to say, and
Hmm.
I still have my notes and I
Oh
got my
yeah.
puzzle pieces, so it's gonna happen.
Yeah, that's great. I can't wait. It's one of my. It's one of the
Yeah.
great. It's like a movie. It's a movie person's movie.
Right.
It's like you almost have to like it. It's an obligation, really.
It is, and I think it does have at least with like the stop motion, we got a little bit of a bridge to what we're talking about today with Ingo's film within the world of Charlie Kaufman's
Yeah. When did
Antkind.
you when did you finish it?
I finished it 2 days ago.
Okay.
So I first of all, this is weird. This is going to be the first time and possibly the only time we ever cover a book here on Piecing It Together. But
Hmm.
listeners of the show know I absolutely am a Charlie Kaufman mega fan, and so it makes sense that I would want to cover this on the show, do a full-fledged episode on it.
Hmm.
And it was a huge undertaking for me to read a 700 plus page book, and so I might as well make something of it rather than I actually set July on hold. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go from I had been doing like 8 or 9 episodes a month of this podcast, along with a bunch of other stuff. I was like, I'm gonna just go down to 4 episodes, so that way I could work on my music and a bunch of other projects I have. And then all of a sudden, I'm reading like 4 hours a day of this book, taking up my entire life. So I definitely wanted to make use of the time that I had put into this thing.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean it's a pretty big book. It took me a couple days. I'm a fast reader. I read a lot. And I appreciate you having me on to do this episode because I think would be a good fit because I'm a
Yeah.
really avid reader. And I liked the book. I thought it was good. It wasn't great,
Hmm.
but it was good. It wasn't great literature, but I laughed a lot and it really,
Right.
out loud. It was a very funny book. And so I think what I can bring today is some book puzzle pieces, and I'm
Yeah.
going to make a really hard case for people to read the books I'm going to talk about because I think that they're really good and should be read. So I'm just assuming that they haven't been read. There's probably a lot of people, obviously, who've read these books, so
Sure.
they could join my fight to get more people to read them because they are
Sure.
truly good, really good.
Yeah, I'm happy that you're going to be bringing that that perspective because yeah, I most likely maybe there'll be one or two on your list that I have read, but
Mhm.
I've read so few books. It's kind of embarrassing, but it is what it is, and
Hey,
I'll be
I
bringing
use
mostly
Safari.
movies.
Okay, I use Safari, so we're all guilty in
That's
some
true.
way.
We
Okay.
all have our things. So let's jump in because I know this is going to be a pretty long conversation. This is a long book. There's a lot of ideas being explored here. There's a lot to talk about. So let's jump in. What do you got for your first puzzle piece for Antkind?
All right, so it's a little bit of a three-parter, but I think it's a good place to start. I'm going to just begin with the work of Kurt Vonnegut, the
Hmm.
great writer and satirist and humorist, kind of our modern Mark Twain, who died, oh boy, almost, I think, 7 years, something like that ago. It's hard to believe that
Hmm.
he's been gone so long, but he was one of our great, modern writers, someone that we got to walk the earth with. Is very exciting. So the first thing that I had mentioned is a short story, actually, of his that he wrote called Harrison Bergeron. And Harrison Bergeron, this is something you could actually read, David, because it's only
Oh,
like 3 pages long. Okay, I'm
I
gonna
like the
sass.
idea of a short story. That's a
Yeah,
great
I'm
thing.
gonna sass you a little bit. I'm gonna be an elitist prick about these books. So just heads up. No, I'm just kidding. I'm
I'm
kidding.
fine.
I'm just messing with you. Anyway, so Harrison Bergeron's a very short story. It's actually a part of his collection, Welcome to the Monkey House, which is a collection of his short stories. But it was I actually was first introduced to it as a kid in school. An English teacher gave it to me to read. But it's essentially about uh, giving everybody that is either physically advanced or mentally advanced some type of handicap so that they become the most average, like we can get everyone to the same playing field. So people that are
Mm,
lower intelligence have fewer handicaps, and people of greater intelligence have more handicaps to kind of even the playing field and make everybody equal. And
right.
the story is about how equality is a dangerous concept. What length do we go for equality? And of course, now it's a very topical issue, which Antkind is a very topical book, which more so than I was expecting. And it's
Yeah,
kind of a weird thing to say right now, of like the dangers of equality, right? Because we're fighting for equality, and that's obviously a basic human right that we need to supply to people around the world and in our own country. But at the same time, I think it is bold to talk about the possibility of this being corrupted, this idea. So, how I'm going to tie
sure.
it to Antkind is I feel like he kind of attacked the social climate more than I
Hmm.
thought he was going to. And I think it really was about, I guess, the fear that artists have about equality in the more abstract way, obviously not in like, people need to have basic human rights, but what they worry about and what I worry about is the loss of individuality,
Sure.
and that's kind of on the darkest spectrum, I guess, of equality. It's not really where everyone's focus is at the moment, but I guess it is worth discussing. And Kaufman discusses it, and I think it comes down to from a Harrison Bergeron thing. So
Sure.
great short story. The next one, real quick, is going to be Slaughterhouse-Five. That's Kirk Vonnegut's crowning achievement, his great book, although he wrote many great ones. But because of like time travel and time jumping, and that's a big
Hmm.
part of Slaughterhouse-Five, even though neither book, Antkind or Slaughterhouse-Five, would be considered sci-fi books, they have this kind of time inconsistency or incongruity. And so that's something. And also, I noticed he actually repeats the phrase "so it goes" many times throughout the book. Kaufman does, and this is a phrase
Hmm.
made famous in Slaughterhouse-Five. Every time somebody dies in Kurt Vonnegut's book, he writes "so it goes," and that was
Mm.
actually a phrase that popped up many, I think, 5 or 6 times throughout Antkind. So I thought that was interesting. And then the last one from Vonnegut is Breakfast of Champions, which is one of his more kind of zany, funny books, not quite the literary achievement of the Slaughterhouse-Five. But what Kurt Vonnegut did was write himself into the book
Mm.
as the author of the book. And not only did Kaufman do that with the main character lambasting him constantly, but there was actually
Totally.
a very brief moment where B recognizes that Kaufman might be his creator and his torturer,
Right.
and he hates this guy so much, and it's because he might be writing him. That there's that whole kind of meta quality, which is very Kaufman-esque, the meta element, but it's right out of Breakfast of Champions, and Vonnegut writing himself into the book. So those are the three big pieces of Vonnegut, but just his style, his humor, the satire of it, the social commentary of it. It has Vonnegut written all over it.
Yeah, I those are great ones to start this off. I mean, we're getting into so many of the themes in this book already. I do, just to briefly go back to the social commentary angle of it. It is crazy that this is something he's been working on for 5 or 6 years, or even longer than that, and that
Mm-hmm.
it feels so now, so 2020,
Right.
in everything that he's talking about, everything with the uh, everything with the individuality, everything with politics, everything with the equality and all that stuff. And it's just it's funny that this character B, and this is something that'll come up more and more, but he kind of knows every detail of everything. Whether or not he's right or wrong on anything is kind of,
he's
he
he's mainly
mostly
wrong.
wrong. Yeah,
He's
mostly
mainly
wrong
wrong.
on everything. But
Yeah.
he's so in tune though with all of the conversations that are being had at the moment. And I just think that that's so like such a funny entry point into this very nowness, right? Rather than knowing it all and being right, knowing it all and being wrong is just such a strange direction to take a character. It's
Well,
very
I
great,
think
very Kaufman.
yeah, I mean, I think it's representative of all of us at this point because we have things like the internet, which make us feel
Hmm.
like we're experts, and we
Right.
lose more and more respect for experts every single day. We were like, oh, you know what? I'm going to
Hmm.
believe Jenny McCarthy about vaccinations. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the era we're living in. So, um, so yeah, I think that the B character is really the average human being, maybe, more even than the average American, maybe the average person in this world, but yeah, especially the average American, where we're so confident that we know everything. And I include myself in this. I try my best to not do this, but sometimes you get carried away or you believe the wrong piece of information. I mean, it's, I'll cop to it that we all think we're
Sure.
experts, and we actually know nothing, or our the privilege that we are kind of saddled with blinds us from a lot of the nuance of issues that we become passionate about, and we want to do the right thing, but we're blind to a
Yeah.
lot of the nuance of it. So it's a confusing time, and I think mostly everybody's wrong constantly. That's kind of
Yeah.
the
I think that's absolutely accurate.
yeah. I have
So-
hardly met a person that I was like, yeah, that person knows what's going on. I don't think I've run into that in a hot minute. So
So I am going to start with my first puzzle piece, and I just spoiler alert for the way this is going to go. But my first handful of puzzle pieces, which I will do one at a time, are going to be Charlie Kaufman related projects, and not out of laziness, but out of the fact that he really is going back and exploring some of the same themes that he has explored in many of his projects over this long career that he's had of very interesting and varied things. And so I'm going to start out going all the way back to some of his TV work in the early 90s, such as Get a Life and The Edge, a sketch comedy show that nobody saw. I think Get a Life has a little bit of a cult following. But this book, you said earlier you were surprised how funny it was, and I was surprised at that as well. Obviously, Charlie Kaufman's kind of carved out this niche for, weird, heady movies that certainly are funny, but also explore these big ideas. And there's a lot of that going on in Antkind as well, and we'll get to those in future puzzle pieces and some of the ones you've already mentioned. But it's also just very just balls to the wall, wacky comedy at times. I mean, our character B is constantly falling in manholes or person holes, as he learns to call them. Weird stuff with talking ants and, just weird creatures. And the book opens up with a scene where these just kind of slack-jawed yokels are seeing a weird creature fall from the sky. And so there's just all kinds of weird, goofy, off-the-wall stuff, which is the kind of stuff that he kind of started out with in those early days. I mean, I don't know if you ever watched The Edge, did you?
I didn't see The Edge. No.
The Edge is one of the strangest. I was so like vindicated when IMDb made me realize that, oh my God, Charlie Kaufman was a writer on like 20 episodes of this. Like, it was the strangest sketch comedy show. Everything was just so just weird and off the wall. And of course, Get a Life. He only wrote a couple episodes, but still, that's where he got his start. And that was the weirdest, best show
that
ever.
was great.
Yeah,
No, it sounds like The Edge is
yeah.
something that's really my thing. I want to get into
Yeah.
it. I mean, because this is an outdated phrase, but I love sketch comedy. Like, I love
Sure.
Upright Citizens Brigade. I love Kids in the
Oh,
Hall.
yeah.
Kids in the Hall was the greatest thing of my life. Like, that was a huge influence to me. Those
Yeah.
5 Canadian guys. So like, I come from that in terms of like comedy, and so I want to
Sure.
explore the edge. So that's a powerful statement. I want to explore the edge, David.
Yeah, you're gonna get there one of these days, Kris. But yeah, no, and just to kind of finish up that point, though, just this book gets so strange. It gets really weird, and I love that about it. It made getting through 700 pages a lot of fun, and I think that can't be understated enough how weird things get. And if you're into weird, I think you're going to at least find things in this that you enjoy, even if it goes on and on and on. But certainly there's a reason for it going on and on and on, and I think that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this to you in passing before as we were both reading it. It almost feels like the longness of it is part of the point. Yeah,
Yes.
the repetition of it is part of what the book is about. And this is going to be kind of strong language. But what I was surprised about it is that it was kind of dumb. It was like the dumbest thing that he had done. And
Right.
what I mean by that is that it's silly. You know what I mean? And I
Right.
mean these are positive things. Like, it has kind of this Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, W.C. Fields element to it, and I mean, especially with like the duos, the Abbott and Costellos, and the Stan and Ollies, I mean, and then all that stuff. But like
Sure.
that's really, but it comes down to like this very broad comedy, and
Yes.
his other stuff is funny. Like there are lines in Adaptation or Being John Malkovich in particular that crack me up, or I quote to this
Oh
day.
yeah.
But I laughed out loud many times in Antkind. Like there were
Mm-hmm.
moments that I really were gut busting hilarious, and I'm not surprised that he's funny. I'm surprised how funny.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah,
I wonder how much of, obviously, Charlie Kaufman is somebody who has had so much trouble getting things made over the years in the world of Hollywood and filmmaking. And I wonder how much of that push and pull with studios has to come down to, his sense of humor and, all that weirdness.
well, he's also angry, and he
Yeah.
seems like an angry man. And I don't know him personally, so I don't want to make any judgments about him. But he seems extremely frustrated. And again, that's
Yeah.
something that we all are, given the time we're in for the most part. But he just seems especially angry, and a
Yeah.
lot of that, the coping of anger for creative people is often humor. But there's kind of
Sure.
like this rage to Antkind that that's kind of a weird thing. That kind of leads me to a puzzle piece I want to bring up later, so I won't touch on that too much. But there's just kind of like this visceral element to the humor where he's almost just letting himself go. I heard in an
Right.
interview that what appealed to him about writing a novel was the freedom.
Yeah.
And all of us, as a filmmaker myself, the thing is that we're all dictators that that swallow that element of us, because filmmaking is a collaborative process at every
Hmm.
stage, from a business standpoint, from the creative standpoint, from a technical standpoint. There's a lot of chefs in the kitchen, and you have to lead them. If you're the creator of the content or the director, you have to definitely be the North Star, but there's a lot of sacrificing, and
Yeah.
mostly that's a good thing, right? It's when I try to get people that are better than me to make my projects better. Best idea wins. But there is
Yeah.
an appeal about writing poetry. Let's say I write poetry, and it's because no one messes with it. I don't have to share it with anybody. Now, is it my best work? No, the films I collaborate with people are better, but the
Right.
poems are mine, strictly mine. So there is the satisfying quality about it, and I sense that in his book. I sense that
I,
from like he was just letting go and being totally
yeah.
himself.
And I hope that he got what he wanted out of this. Regardless of how it's received by the public and everything, I hope that getting to work that way was therapeutic for him in a way, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I don't know. What I'm always so surprised to learn about someone like him is that it's a lot more, as it comes than you would think. I'm a
Right.
plotter, right? I plan everything out before I even begin, and I know where it's
Hmm.
going. And a lot of people that I admire don't work that way. Uh, Charlie Kaufman has kind of figured out this book as he was going, and then went back
Right.
and retrofitted certain things. Now, does the quality of the book itself suffer from a literary standpoint? Possibly. I think I can make that argument, but I think maybe this was just a therapeutic and cathartic experience for him, and I got a lot of laughs out of it.
For sure. So, what do you got for your next piece?
Well, the kind of sticking on the humor side of it, I wanted to bring up Woody Allen films. I think are deeply in his brain, but specifically Woody Allen's writings. A book in particular called "Without Feathers." And there's a great quote, which is, hope is a thing with feathers. And then Woody Allen comes out with a book called Without Feathers.
Yeah.
So he's this kind of hopeless guy. And the book, that's like one of the first books that I read in my young life where I was doubling over in laughter. Like Without Feathers is hilarious, sentence to sentence. And so I
Hmm.
think that that must have entered in, either by osmosis or physically reading it. But I mean, I have a feeling it has a deep thumbprint on Kaufman's forehead. Just the absolute hilarity and absurdity of it. And what's great about those early Woody Allen films, which he became a much better filmmaker as he went on, became a little bit more serious. But what's great about them is their zaniness and their absurdity. He was basically a modern Marx Brothers, and I think there's a lot
Mm.
of that in Antkind. There's just this like go for the joke, and
Sure.
because Kaufman doesn't care about reality, in a strictly linear way, you can make it about the comedy in the most like singular way possible. When the confines of the setup don't matter, when you can have someone change appearance 5 seconds after you describe them, or they can change
Right.
time, or the elements of the joke can then be mutated to something else. It's just about the joke. It's just about the laugh. So
Right.
in a weird way, that's what early Woody Allen was. Is There was totally absurd, and that's what Kaufman did. Is that he just went for the joke in a way that I was surprised by. Not to be repetitive, but like the the framework of surrealism is actually very beneficial to comedy because you don't care about any of the other factors. It's just about how can I get to the funniest possible point.
I think that's why sketch comedy is so great as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Just
exactly.
throw in whatever works and you're out in a couple minutes, and it's just joke after joke.
And it's like a purity to
Yeah,
that kind of comedy when you don't really need the setup to work. It's just
sure.
like, how do we get to the fastest, funniest, craziest thing? And then that in and of itself is the funny moment. It's not because it's ironic, or it's not, there's not, oh, that came back and it connects. Like, no, it's just like the funniest moment in this very second. And that was full of
Yeah,
that stuff for the book.
yeah. Well, I think that Without Feathers sounds like something I would probably really like. I should read that. And then also just one other thing on the surface level, a lot of neurotic chewiness in this book as well.
Mm,
So,
mm-hmm. Or not Jewiness,
yeah, not
right?
chewiness.
There
That's
are
true.
other there's Rosenberg is not only Jewish,
He's got
which
two
will
roses in his name, and he's still not Jewish.
he's still not Jewish.
So I'll go to my next piece, which, continuing along the line here, is 1999's Being John Malkovich, which, of course, was, I think, the first time a lot of people, got to know who Charlie Kaufman is, and is, to this day, one of the great surreal movies of the last, 20, 30 years. And there, as far as connection to Antkind, there is quite literally an entire section where B enters the brain of Donald Trump, or Donald Trunk in this case, and spends a day with him while he gets a new robotic clone that he gets to spend some time with, let's just say. And and but there's also the themes of escaping to different points of view, and like these doppelgangers, and then also puppets, which, I've seen interviews with Charlie where he's saying that, the whole idea of the puppets being used again really is not something that he set out for. It's not a theme he's trying to continue in his career. It just was the best way to make a film that some guy could be working on for 90 years by himself. That's 3 months long. The best way would be for it to be with puppets, because otherwise, how would nobody else have seen any of the film?
I like how he's worried about the
But
logic of it.
yeah, I know, right?
How could it possibly be that there'd be all these people working on it?
I mean, it makes sense, but
That's the only
it just
time
goes
he
to
gave
show
a
how
shit
much he,
about
how
continuity.
much he worries about it. Continuity is very important in a 3-month film made over the course of 90 years.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, Being John Malkovich, that is the next piece from Charlie Kaufman's filmography.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorite modern films. It's such an ingenious idea and so funny, and I love the story behind it about how no one ever thought it would ever get made. He wrote the craziest script possible on spec so that he could get it out there and get other writing jobs, and it just fell into the
Yeah,
hands of Spike Jones because through Francis Ford Coppola, right? Because he was
you're right.
married, at the time into the family and with Sofia Coppola, and what a fantastic story! And sending it to John Malkovich and him rating it on a plane, like going to Europe once and being like, "This is insane!" Like,
Yeah.
and there's so many great, wonderful stories about how that thing came to be and how it made Charlie Kaufman the voice that he is. And yeah, there's so much. I think Antkind was definitely him, Charlie. I mean, going back in and looking at his career in
Yeah.
a certain way, and what's funny is that the B character, the main character B, um, is not Charlie, and is Charlie all at the same time. There's this
Yeah.
fantastic, like, you never, because he criticizes and compliments a lot of films that you would be that are unexpected, right? He's a huge fan of Judd Apatow in the book,
Right.
and
Yeah.
he takes an absolute shit on Christopher Nolan, which I enjoy every moment of
Mhm.
that. Every second that he talked shit about him, I liked it. I loved every moment of that.
If I remember correctly, I sent you that passage, and then you ordered the book immediately.
Yeah. He compares Christopher Nolan to Starbucks, and I was like, and that's the thing is to me, this is totally subjective, right? I have no way of confirming or denying this. But when he criticizes Christopher Nolan, that's Charlie Kaufman, and when he
Right.
loves Judd Apatow, that's B Rosenberg, or right Rosenberg, right? So um, that's up to me. I decide when he's Charlie and when he's not. But I definitely
Sure.
think that the book was a way for him to kind of look at the career he's in and the things that he's done already, and because I think he's said he's very upset with the film industry. He's angry with it.
Yeah.
And so I think that comes out in the book, but not in a very angry way. Kind of to qualify what I said a little bit earlier, him being so angry. The book doesn't read angry.
Yeah.
It
I think it's more
reads.
frustrated than angry.
Yeah, it doesn't really read angry because that's a very unappealing
Yeah.
thing. And like I said, I'm going to come back to that later on another puzzle piece. But um, I mean, being John Malkovich was what launched him. So I think it's appropriate that he went back and kind of revisited similar things, and
Sure.
in a cathartic way of kind of where he is and where he started.
Absolutely. So what do you got for your next piece?
So I'm going to mention Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which is probably
Mhm.
going to be one of the most read books on this list of mine, it being kind of a modern phenomenon. And despite it being 1,000 pages, that's one of the things that I want to compare it is just the ambition and the scope of this book. I think that David Foster Wallace was a cultural moment in the literary community, and I think it's inspired and kind of set the tone for a lot of modern books of what's possible and what's marketable. I think Infinite
Mhm.
Jest sold over 1 million copies now, and that's pretty amazing. And it's experimental. It has a very unconventional narrative structure. It's ambitious in terms of its social commentary, and it does all this brilliant stuff with footnotes and how it explores that idea. It's very very funny and sophisticated. But I think they share. I think there couldn't really be an Antkind without an Infinite Jest, and I don't know if
Mhm.
it's creatively. I'm not sure if Kaufman would ever directly write a book like Infinite Jest, but I think that book made a landscape possible for Antkind to whatever success it finds. It's kind of in it. I think it'd be in debt to the success of Infinite Jest.
Right. Did you notice that there is one footnote in this book, and then there's no further information on that? There's just a one next to "I am certain," and I wonder if that's a callback to
I imagine it is. I didn't
that.
know that. I'm learning that just now as you told me that, but I would imagine that it is some type of reference. David Foster Wallace was a huge influence, and in many ways kind of the anti Kaufman because he was so committed to. He had a very interesting perspective on irony, that we're too consumed with irony, and that
Right.
sincerity is kind of where real comedy lives. When the person's being played straight, that's when it's funniest. And there's whole kinds of theories that he wrote about that. And in a way, I think Kaufman explores similar themes in Antkind. I think B himself is so sincere, but the whole thing is so ironic. The Antkind itself
Right.
is a huge, dense piece of irony. So in a way, it's the antithesis of Infinite Jest, and yet I think it's part of the lineage.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Does it?
Well, I'm gonna.
I hope
Yeah,
so.
I think it does because
Okay.
because it sounds like that combination of, well, first of all, the like you said, the bigness of it, and like the expansive book going like just so huge and so long and so so much being included in it, but then to fill it with both comedy and kind of anti-comedy in a way, and kind of
Hmm.
going the ironic direction, but then the character is more sincere, and I mean there is just such a big mix of themes there.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that Antkind surprised me about and this is kind of a criticism of the book, is that it's kind of thin on what it's actually about.
Right.
There's not a lot of it touches on many things, right? It kind of touches on many topical things, on many societal things, on a lot of creative things, but it makes very few points about them. And not that every
Hmm.
book has to make points or preach to you. Maybe that's part of what Kaufman was going for, is not to preach to us, and that's so in that sense I understand. But it seemed, when it was all said and done, somewhat thin on really the substance of it. The substance
Sure.
of it was the madness, was the absurdity, was the hilarity from page to page. But there wasn't a lot of, like, I feel like adaptation is about so much. Adaptation is incredibly dense, and you
Oh
can
yeah.
extrapolate so much. And for a book that's 700 pages, I haven't really thought about it much. There weren't ideas in it that really penetrated me on any type of sincere level. I had a fun time
Sure.
reading it. I laughed, and then I closed the book and I went about my life. And that was
Yeah.
that was an interesting, that's unexpected. I thought there'd be more. Something like
Well,
Infinite Jest, there's a lot. I've been chewing on Infinite Jest for 20 years.
right. Yeah, and I think I could agree with you on that. While I also probably I feel like I enjoyed it maybe more than you, because I think even though I do love the deep ideas that Charlie Kaufman explores in most of his films, especially Adaptation, like you just said, which is my next piece, uh, it was just, it made it more of a fun thing to get through. And
Mhm.
that's also rewarding in its own way, of course. But
Sure.
to go to that next piece, Adaptation, and I'm skipping over Human Nature here because I've actually only seen it once, and I'm not sure, there's probably some connection that could be made to Human Nature
Yeah.
as well. But Adaptation, of course, is a movie I've brought up a lot. I always call it my favorite film. I'm sticking with that. But of course, Charlie has written himself into this one as well, which is a major thing from Adaptation. I'm sure a lot of people hearing that maybe would make their eyes roll a little bit, but I think it does work so well for him to be doing that again here, within all of the wackiness, as well as the fact that this character is a film critic and cites, you know, dozens and dozens of films. Just before we started recording, I sent you, somebody made a letterbox list of all the films that he mentions, and how would he not mention Charlie Kaufman films? And for him to be a film critic, how would he not criticize the hell out of Charlie Kaufman films? So it kind of
Mhm.
makes sense as well. But aside from that, I also was very much reminded of the Charlie Kaufman character in Adaptation's interactions with his agent. Uh,
Yeah.
and the way B is interacting with his agent here in Antkind, his film critic, literary agents in this case. But there was like a very similar like way that they talk in this as well, I
Mhm.
felt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're all business, right?
Yeah.
The adaptation guy is so offensive, talking about fucking women in the ass as they walk past his office.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was shocking 20 years ago, and it's shocking now, even more so. But I love that. Now he has very little respect, I think, for that side of the artistic community, the reps.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
clear. Well, the thing about,
Definitely.
to touch on your puzzle piece a little bit about the writing himself into it, what I admire about Charlie Kaufman is that he is a narcissist, clearly, and yet
Mhm.
he hides that so beautifully by making his character, his version of himself, as pathetic as possible.
Right.
And we don't really think of it as narcissism. We don't really look at it that way because he's so pathetic. I mean, Nicolas Cage opening. I mean, what a great performance, by the way.
Oh, the
Just a side
best.
note, so good. Um, but the opening of that film is a monologue about what a piece of shit he is, and
Yeah.
then the entirety of Antkind is just denigrating and smudging the name of Charlie Kaufman and calling out all the criticism. It's kind of, again, it's kind of like, it's one of those things of like getting ahead of criticism, like
Mhm.
pointing out that what people think about you and therefore you are deflecting it. It's this kind of like weird incestuous thing that I think artists have with critics. They
Sure.
kind of own the mistakes they make, and therefore they don't seem like mistakes, and it's very clever of him to do that. But I mean, a narcissist is a narcissist is a narcissist, but in a fun way. I mean, I have no problem with it. I think it works beautifully, and I think it's hilarious, and
Yeah.
I think he does it really well. I mean, what's the difference between him and Federico Fellini? Federico Fellini made movies about him openly. He cast Marcello Mastroianni as a Fellini avatar. So this is
Hmm.
something that some artists do. And the thing is that there's no rules in art. Either it works or it doesn't.
No.
Right? If it
Yeah.
doesn't work, we call it bullshit, or we call it pretentious, or we call it narcissistic. But if it works, we call it genius. So whatever, just do it. And if it works, then great. And if it doesn't, then we'll mock you. And that's it. That's the end of that one.
Absolutely. So what do you got for your next piece?
So I'm gonna bring up a great and confounding book, a book that all weird books wish to be, which is James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. So a quick anecdote about Finnegan's Wake. It took me 6 years to read it, and I probably understand 2% of it. It's a very complicated book. It took him 17 years to write, Mr. Joyce. Probably the greatest English language writer after Shakespeare, in my opinion. James Joyce is truly the great writer, and it's a dream book. It's a book of dreams. It's a follow up to Ulysses, which takes place all in one day, which is a challenge unto itself. And that's another part I want to mention about Joyce's experimentation with time. I think that's something that
Hmm.
Kaufman does and is inspired by. But Finnegan's Wake in particular, because it's a dream narrative that makes literally no sense. That
Right.
it's written in a vernacular made up of slang and made up of regional colloquialisms, and you have
Sure.
to basically I had about 30 false starts, right? I couldn't get past the first page. I read the first page, it was all gobbledygook. I closed the book and I went back on my shelf. And this is being a diehard James Joyce fan. I had read Ulysses, I had read Dubliners, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, the whole bit. And I could not crack the first page of Finnegan's Wake. And the whole
Hmm.
literary world said that it was a practical joke. They said, this is not a serious novel. This is a joke. He played a joke on us. But I'm hard pressed to believe that a genius such as him spent 17 years writing only a joke. Was it
Right.
funny? Certainly, it is certainly funny, and it is thumbing his nose at people and saying, "Here's a puzzle. Solve this for the next 100 years." That's certainly part of it. But there is a great book in there somewhere. And what I learned is I had to read it out loud. It's actually music, and the only way that I could get through it was reading it out loud to myself, and I had to accept that I was only going to understand part of it, that it was not only for me, that people in small parts of Ireland would understand a chapter because of the dialect and the
Hmm.
vernacular, and I would not understand that part. And so there was this submission to it. And I think that there's never been a book as bold, as ambitious, as confounding, as frustrating as Finnegan's Wake. And I think that all great absurdist books are in the shadow of it. So I'm not sure if Charlie Kaufman sat down and said, I'm going to write my version of Finnegan's Wake. I'm not sure if it's that direct, but we all
Hmm.
owe a great debt to Finnegan's Wake for just its insanity and its music.
Right.
And that's I mean that's it's and then Joyce in general with time. They say Finnegan's
Yeah.
Wake is all one night, or they say Ulysses takes place all in one day, and that one we can confirm it does take place all in one day. And the thing about Kaufman is he keeps bringing up 3 months. Did you notice 3 months? This
Right. That's
not
like the
just the
recurring
film.
thing.
Yeah, it's not just the
Yeah.
film. The film takes place. The film is 3 months long, but everything is three
He's in the
months.
hospital for 3 months. He's working at various jobs for 3 months.
Everything's 3 months.
Many things.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was this reoccurring theme of time and what time meant. Now the book doesn't ever give us that. It's very similarly to where Finnegan's Wake never gives us a satisfying ending where the guy wakes up from a dream. That doesn't exist either. What's cool about
Hmm.
Finnegan's Wake, and this is the little last tidbit I'll talk about it, because trust me, I can go on about it. I've studied. It's a fascinating book. It kind of ruled my life for a few years. But it's written in a circular structure, which is very unique. So the first line is a sentence fragment and opens up in the middle of a sentence, and then 600 pages later or whatever, it ends in the middle of the same sentence. So it's
Hmm.
written actually like a labyrinth in a circle. and it
Well,
begins in the
did you know
same sentence.
that's kind of how Antkind is then,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Antkind starts with it started with a thunk or something like that, and then it
Mm-hmm.
ends with him falling down a hole and landing at the bottom of the hole.
Yep.
So absolutely, we're in that same kind of, and it's so disorienting because then you're left with a whole new way to think about the book. And like you said, maybe Charlie Kaufman's not trying to say any big things with this one. Maybe it's just for the sake of comedy, but at the same time, it does. If you are going to sit with it and try to explore everything that happened and what was real, what wasn't, what was part of the film, what was part of the remembering of the film, what was part of just his imagination, it all goes around in a circle and it all is mixed up. And that, I think, is the ultimate thing that's happening here, is that it's just dealing with the fragileness of memories and our imaginations.
Yeah, and kind of how it's a cyclical process. Like we remember things and we forget things, and we seem to be doing the same thing over and over again, and our lives are kind of on these loops. And
Yeah.
that's, I think that I'm not sure if even Joyce was making that comment in making the book so labyrinth-like, but
Yeah.
it's definitely this. That we're kind of like, as human beings, we're on this loop. We're on this carnival ride that's just going around and around. And I think they
Right.
share that idea. You could extrapolate that idea anyway.
Sure. Well, I'm going to skip over Confessions of a Dangerous Mind and go to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind from 2004, directed by Michel Gondry. And of course, here in Antkind, like we were just saying, just dealing with a lot of questions about memory and about whether or not memory can be altered, changed, whether or not our memories are accurate, whether or not things can be remembered correctly, and what memories actually mean to us. And also within the scenes of hypnosis within this book, dealing with digging up memories and getting rid of them in order to get to the important stuff. And so there's a lot of that dealing with the mind and dealing with memory that is a direct connection, I think, back to Eternal Sunshine.
Oh yeah, certainly. I think Charlie Kaufman's preoccupied with how unreliable our memories are. And really
Yeah.
our memory is the only thing we have as a path to identity. I mean, who we
Yeah.
are is made up of what we remember, and we don't remember much. That's the
Mm-hmm.
saddest. That's like a really sad. To me, that's the saddest thing. That's much sadder than death. Death is not a sad thing, in my opinion. It's a motivator to make something out of your life. It's you have a time limit.
Right.
Clock's
Right.
ticking. Get moving, type of thing. So I can find positivity in death. What I have a hard time with is that who I am is made up of what I remember. And not only do I not remember very much, but I taint my memories. I change them. They mutate. I color
They're
them.
always changing.
Yeah, they're not objective at all. And there's something very beautiful about that, of course, that we kind of remember things how we want to. This is something. This is not a puzzle piece, but briefly, like, a Fellini thing. He did that often. He made a movie called Amarcord, and it actually translates to "I remember," and
Mm.
it's in a very specific Italian dialect, and it's about his memories. And was that really what Italy
Mm.
was like when he was growing up? No, but that's what his life was like to him. And that's profound. I guess that's kind of touching on memories. Is that was the thing I felt was a little thin of the book, as he was like, that was the point he was making, is like, memories are our own and they change, and and I was like, yeah.
So you don't think he discovered something with time rabies that travel back in time and alter our memories? You don't think that he's getting
Well,
getting to some deeper truth there?
that's, I guess, here's my problem with it. I think is that there was like a chapter, I don't know, maybe two or three from the end, right? Third to the
Mm.
end. That was kind of like this revelatory chapter where, and I guess it's kind of poking fun. It depends on how you look at it, but it felt like Chuck Kaufman was just like giving us a deep chapter to be like, all that you read was worth it because of this very minor revelation that memory
Right.
isn't
Right.
perfect. And I was like, yeah, I know memory is not perfect. I know that already. Yeah, I've already. That's the thing, is either it's ironic and he's purposefully giving us this lame thing that B himself because he himself is so lame, that character can't really have a profound revelation. And I will accept that
Right, right.
explanation. I will accept that. But at the same time, how it reads is that, like, here's 700 pages of nonsense, and then here's one chapter where, like, it means something profound, and it's not profound. You know,
Right.
memory is imperfect.
I feel like a major goal of this was to make himself laugh. Like,
Yeah, I think
it
so too.
really
No,
it
you're
really
right.
seems like he's amusing himself, you know?
For sure. I saw in an interview that he said, like, he was nervous about his ability to write at the level of the great writers. He was nervous about the quality of the literature itself. But he said, well, but it's funny, and a funny book only needs to be funny. And I think that
Right.
that's not really. I don't really think that's self-deprecating. I think that's honest. Like,
Sure.
he might have a limitation in his writing ability in this medium, because I think he's one of the
Mhm.
finest screenplay writers that ever lived.
Right.
Screenwriters to live. But maybe in this medium, he has certain limitations, and his goal was to make us laugh, and he succeeded there, tenfold.
Right.
So,
So what do you got for your next piece?
well, I'll just stick on the memory theme. I'll just briefly touch on this one. It's called Remembrance of Things Past, but it's also translated sometimes in Search of Lost Time, and it's by Marcel Proust. And Proust is considered possibly the greatest French writer to ever live. He wrote this massive, I believe, 6 or 7 volume book, Remembrance of Things Past, and
Mhm.
it's all about the unreliability of memory. A man bites into a cookie, and it brings him back to his childhood. And then this, like, over 1,000-page multi-volume book springs from this single moment when he bites into this cookie, and it brings him back to his childhood. And it's all about the exploration of memory and time, and what does it do to people. It's the great crowning achievement of time and memory in literature, and
Mhm.
it's brilliant. It's beautiful. Every single page of that insane amount of volumes, and I think it's considered the longest book in history. I may be wrong. If
Oh,
something may have
wow.
surpassed it, or I'm not sure if that's 100% reliable, but I know it's considered one of the longest works of fiction ever created, and if not the. And it's a masterpiece, and it really is about the subtlety and the subjective view we take on our lives. Very beautifully done.
Mhm. Right on. Well, I'm gonna move right along to my next piece, which is 2008's Synecdoche, New York, which I do think shares the most with Antkind. I feel like Antkind in a lot of ways is like a more comedic uh, companion piece to Synecdoche, New York. I think he's dealing with a lot of the same themes and issues, and as far as just the story is concerned itself, I mean, we're dealing with a filmmaker who has created this all-encompassing film that has taken him 90 years. It takes 3 months to watch, which is very, in a way, similar to Caden's play that is going to
Ever
have
growing.
everything in it. Yeah, and just growing completely out of control, spiraling out of control. I a line from Synecdoche, New York. There are nearly 13 million people in the world. None of those people is an extra. They're all leads in their own story, which I always thought was so great.
Yeah.
I think that is such a perfect connection to this whole concept of the seen versus the unseen, which,
Hmm.
for those who haven't read the book, the filmmaker Ingo, who has stop motion animated every character and every scene within the movie, this 3 month long movie, he has also animated all of the unseen characters who are off camera because they all have their own story and they're all their own person and they can't be forgotten about just because they're unseen. And I think that is totally something that he was dealing with in Synecdoche, New York, trying to include everything within this production.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that there's a direct correlation. I do think it's almost an answer to Synecdoche. Which is funny because usually other
Right.
artists will make answers to certain things, but I feel like he needed, in a way, I feel like Antkind is more about us watching Synecdoche, because B is
Hmm.
an audience member to Ingo's film, and Caden. We're with Caden on his creative journey, but we're with B trying to appreciate Ingo's movie. And I
Right.
think that was one of the things that is was more satisfying to me. Maybe because I consider myself an artist, and so maybe I found something more personal in it. But the idea of making art, especially filmmaking, it often gets commandeered by the more traditional idea of success, right? You need to
Mhm.
get people to see it. I'm always looking for money. These are things that it makes it very hard just because I want to just create things artistically. It's another reason why I write poetry, like I mentioned earlier, because I don't have to be hunting for money. I don't have to sell
Mhm.
myself. I don't have to sell the idea always. Now, of course, if I were to publish that poetry and try to sell mass amounts of books, I'd have to get into that whole process too. But there's
Right.
something he in the book. Kaufman mentions a lot of outsider art. A guy named Henry Darger, who was a janitor. This is a real person, and he was a
Mhm.
janitor his entire life, and then he died. And in his apartment they found a 15,000 page book that he had written his whole life, and
Oh, wow.
they found hundreds of watercolor paintings that illustrated the book. And he's like the pioneer or the most well-known of outsider artists. So the concept of outsider
Right.
artists being that they never achieve commercial success, but that we
That's
don't.
gonna be me one day with my albums.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's us, me too, right? We'll be the champions of outsider art. They never made it. They
Yeah.
never were successful. It's time to celebrate them. No, but this was a man. This was a very humble man, janitor, that just no one knew what he was doing, and he never sought that, you know. And it's tough to know what his motives were, but he never looked for conventional success. He never looked for an audience. And I think Kaufman is suggesting, again, kind of ironically, being this is a professional book with a book deal that was going to get published, whenever he handed it over, that
Mhm.
an artist doesn't always look for an audience, and so I'm kind of thinking through this process as I'm saying it. So sorry if it's not as eloquent as I usually am. I'm just kidding. No, but to me, there's kind of a weird issue with that because as a filmmaker, it's a very beautiful thing of where it's deeply selfish, right? You make this movie because you're fascinated by the concept and you're doing it to express yourself artistically. But then the final stage of that is giving it away, giving it to an audience, right? What is a film without an audience? Really, it's just a masturbatory experience for you. Which there's value in expressing yourself, but as a filmmaker, there's a paradox because it's about other people and it's about giving it to other people. And I never hope that I put an idea in my films that someone's going to get. I'm not trying to like tell them something and I want them to figure out what I meant a year ago. My hope is that they find something of value in it and make it personal. And how are they wrong for interpreting it differently than I quote unquote meant it? So when I was reading the book of Antkind, and he kind of expressed, Ingo was kind of this great outsider artist like a Henry Darger, which he mentions Darger
Mhm.
in the book by name. It was it's conflicting because there is something so beautiful about not looking for commercial success and just doing it for you and being an artist in a pure
Right.
sense. But as a filmmaker, does that ever really exist? I
Right.
don't know. Like, why are we
Yeah.
doing this
No, it's
podcast? Is it so I could talk to you, or is it so that people could listen to it and hopefully find some value in something and read something they haven't read or watch a movie they haven't watched? Like, it's for other people. This is about giving it
right.
away. Now, if you get some awesome deal, someone wants to sponsor you, and you get sponsored by Gatorade for piecing it together. That's good. You get to, make a little money. But does that take away
That's
your
an interesting
integrity?
sponsor choice.
I don't know. I just
Yeah.
named something.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm just,
I like the idea that you've got a Gatorade bottle sitting on your desk right now. That's where you came up with
that's exactly what happened. I just Kaiser Soze'd you. I just looked behind.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went off on a tangent. I apologize, everybody. I was just kind of thinking through that idea, but the book, it's like we want to be deeply personal and private, but is that really what a film is? That I guess that's one
Right.
of the deeper things the book did make me think about. That's where it succeeded in going on a deeper level. I don't know if that's too subjective though. I don't. That's just my journey with the book.
not to go deeper on this tangent, but this episode is going to be crazy long compared to most episodes
Like
anyway.
the
So,
book.
but yeah, I like the book, but I made that joke that my music will be discovered as some unseen art eventually. But honestly, this whole quarantine situation has me in this really weird frame of mind where it's like I just want to continue creating,
Mhm.
and I can't get out there. Like I can't go, I can't do shows. I can't like go to film festivals with my videos. I can't, it's like
Mhm.
I kind of am just doing it for myself at the current moment without any knowledge of if there's ever going to be a back to a kind of normal where I can go out there and promote it in any kind of real meaningful way. And so it kind of feels like I'm just doing it for myself right now.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's very true. And
It's a
I
strange time.
it's a strange time. Yeah, I've tried to live in the place where these ideas overlap. Like, the reason why I want conventional success is that I have access to the level that I feel like I should be performing at. I don't care about
Mhm.
money. I don't, I mean, the thing is, money is nice. I want money to live. You know what I mean? Yeah,
Right.
that's why I want money. But the reason why I want someone to give me insane amounts of money is so that I could make a film at the level that I feel that I am capable. And that's where the
Right.
paradox comes in. I am searching for money not from greed, not but it's because I'm making movies now on shoestring budgets, and it's extremely satisfying, and I love it, and it's fantastic. But I want to go bigger. I want to do
Right.
bigger things. And just because of the art form I've chosen, it requires this ridiculous sum of, inhuman money. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
and I'm always hunting it. I'm always looking for it. I'm always this man. I'm trying to sell myself and sell my projects and blah blah blah. And it's weird because it's actually not for those conventional. I don't need a golden statue. I don't need to win awards, or I just want to be at that level. It's like
Mhm.
the at the ultimate peak of what I can do, what I think I can do. I'd like to see myself do
Yeah.
that. So it's just kind of that's
With no
another weird thing.
restraints.
Yeah, with no restraints. I need to hire
No.
the best crews. I need to hire the best people, and that just costs money. And so, yeah, I
Absolutely.
envy musicians in this day and age because you can invest 5 to 10 grand and make brilliant, the highest quality stuff that's competitive with they spend 40 grand, you can spend five, and that's true in a
Right.
lot of ways for
Right.
filmmaking too. But in terms of the highest possible level, it's still you need crazy money still for filmmaking.
Let's move on to your next piece then. What do you got next?
So I'm going to mention the work of Franz Kafka. This is something that I think has chased Kaufman for his entire career. This kind of the Kafka-esque has become a phrase in our popular vernacular, our popular lexicon of
Mhm.
phrases. Things are Kafka-esque. There's even a Breaking Bad episode called Kafka-esque, and it's just associated
Yeah.
with weird things, right? It's just weird now.
Right.
But he was an early pioneer of surrealist literature. The Metamorphosis being one of his most famous, where a man wakes up one day and he's mysteriously turned into a gigantic bug or rodent, depending on the translation you read. And I would mention Metamorphosis specifically because of the bug imagery. The ants. How different really is it from a giant roach? There is even a giant ant, an
Mhm.
autonomous, brilliant ant that creates a reverse rabies. So how is that Gregor Samsa from the Metamorphosis? We'll never know. But the other thing is, I'd say the castle, maybe more cosmetically, because in the castle the main character only goes by K, and
Mm.
in this book he only goes by B.
Right.
And then the trial is another one of Kafka's that I recommend and talk about as a puzzle piece, because it's about a character who is put on trial for a crime he doesn't know what it is. He's never been told what he's charged with, and this entire trial happens, and he has no idea what's going on. And I feel like B is always being persecuted, and he doesn't understand
Sure.
why. He is on trial, just not literally, and he makes many comments about that, but he doesn't know what crime he's committed.
Right. Right.
So very
Yeah.
Kafkaesque.
He seems to be a punching bag for the universe in a way.
Yeah, for Kaufman. Kaufman, I think, is the god of this
Yeah.
universe, and I think he's enjoying just torturing. the character, and he's a big kid with a magnifying glass. It feels like.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna skip it, but I might as well include it. The last Kaufman project that we've gotten, Anomalisa, of course, the puppets. That's a connection right there. But also, I think there's also the main characters like kind of desire to connect with other people, but also being kind of a self-involved kind of a dick of a character who isn't really that interested in connecting with other people when it comes down to it. And so I think that there's a kind of push and pull there within that mind of whether you like people or not, and whether you want to connect with people or not. And so I think that that's kind of a connection with this B character.
Well, to me, that's also something that feels very autobiographical. That feels like it's very revealing of Kaufman himself. Again, that's just an assumption, but it's like I get the feeling that because Kaufman writes these very humanist pieces of work, where he's trying to look at people and get to the reality of them. He doesn't want to sensationalize them, and he wants to value the normal human struggle and strife. But I feel like Kaufman likes people in theory. He likes them.
Right.
He likes them as an idea, and I don't know if he would. And again, this is total, conjecture. I'm just going off my feelings based on his work. I get the sense that he probably is a very private person, and he doesn't want to. He wants to be left alone, but he wants to write great books and great films about the human experience without really dealing with humans. So I feel like that's a lot of artists. A lot of artists, I consider myself a humanist. It's really the only philosophy that I adhere to. I'm not a religious person, and I consider myself a humanist. And I try to make my work kind of have a humanism slant. And I try to be optimistic about people, but at the same time, you have a hard time given the reality that you live with day in and day out, where fake doctors are going online and saying that there's demons and that you should take drugs that don't work, and then you're like, just kill everybody, just kill everyone, just let everyone die. Let COVID run
Why
wild.
are we continuing as a species? Why are we looking for a cure? Like,
do we need to be here? Let's go back. Let's global warming. Let's crank it up, and let's all
let the ants take over.
Yeah. So I battle that and that kind of misanthropic view, because my nature is to be optimistic. My nature is actually to like people, but then I'm also constantly angry. So I don't know.
I relate, buddy.
Yeah, and then I think Kaufman does too. Again, it's so ironic. He wants to write these great pieces of of humanism, and yet I just don't feel like he likes people very much. So there's that irony as well.
So what do you got for your next piece?
So I'm going to bring up with the great German. I'm sorry, I almost said German. I meant Russian. Excuse me. Dostoevsky, the great writer, my favorite writer, possibly. I know I said James Joyce is the greatest writer. Maybe he is objectively, but I think one of my personal favorites, the man I connect with, is Dostoevsky, the Russian writer of Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov and Demons and a lot of great books. But I'm going to bring up two works in particular from him, which is going to be Notes from Underground, which is a short novel. David, you should read it, you son of a bitch.
Okay.
And it's the first half of the book is just this guy screaming, like just this angry rant. And it's beautiful, and it's a very well written book, and that's probably very B like first person ranting. And then the other book I'll mention briefly is a book called The Double, which is an earlier book from Dostoevsky and kind of considered one of his minor works. He wrote another one of his classics is The Idiot, which is a book I'm adapting with a buddy of mine, Dylan Gallagher. He and I are making a show out of The Idiot, a modern reimagining. So this guy I am very deeply connected with Dostoevsky personally. But The Double is a book that also has had a huge influence on me. And I think of a lot of modern literature and film and television. The idea in The Double, there's a guy, kind of a loser, and one day he shows up to work, and there's an exact duplicate of him, but a successful one. And this has been repeated endlessly throughout film and television. There's just a recent adaptation for film done at The Double, with Jesse Eisenberg. And so there's all kinds of, this is in the popular culture, even though it's considered one of his minor books. and I can
Mhm.
see, there's like double Bs and triple Bs in Antkind,
Yeah.
right? There's like multiple duplicates of this guy, and I think that comes directly from Dostoevsky. But Dostoevsky is the kind of guy you need to sit down and read the book. You need to like take a week off of work and read the Brothers
Yeah.
Karamazov. Everyone should read if everyone read the Brothers Karamazov, this would be a better world. But it's very hard reads. These are dense reads. This is not like, oh, go
Yeah.
have a picnic and read this book. No, you have to like take a month off work and not look at your
Right.
children and just read it.
Well, in our next quarantine, maybe that'll be my new project.
Yeah, quarantine part 2. I'd say,
Yes, that's right.
try to grow a healthy orchid and read some Dostoevsky.
So I am going to move away from Charlie Kaufman projects, and I've got a handful of other puzzle pieces to bring up. And I am going to start with the animated series The Critic.
Oh, yeah.
With our favorite Jay Sherman, the film critic, and it is just a joke a minute, just cutaways, non sequiturs, just weird asides and tangents, and lots of film related humor, film snob humor, film critic humor, jokes about filmmakers and various classic movies and all that kind of stuff. And we, of course, in Antkind are dealing with all of that, all of the above. We get lots and lots of asides with entire chapters that are jokes, such as the comedy duo stuff that just all feels like it could have been little bits and pieces out of critic episodes.
Sure.
And you and I have talked off mic before about how great The Critic is and how much fun that show was, and just how many classic moments there were. And I love being brought back to that, like using the world of Hollywood and just all of these kind of tropes and things that we just know from so many movies as basis for so much comedy is so great.
Yeah, it's a great show. I mean, it's one of those shows that has stood the test of time for me. It's still funny, and I mean, and yeah, I was kind of surprised. I mean, let me take that back. I wasn't surprised. Antkind is such a deep cut on film nerd stuff. I mean, it is film nerdy and unabashedly so. And I was really excited. I sometimes I think about how like if everyone's going to get all these things, but then I think about, well, at the same
Right.
time, there's a million things in here I'm not going to get. It's not like I'm going to get every single reference. So it's like, who cares? Go nuts.
It's so dense with just so many jokes and little bits and pieces and asides and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got for your next piece?
I'm going to talk about a book called Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth. And this was a cultural phenomenon of a book. And it's about a Jewish guy who goes in. The whole book is designed like a therapist session. And it was kind of an ingenious concept. And this Jewish guy just talks about his general neuroses and malaise, and has graphic depictions of self-abuse, aka masturbation, and
Sure.
very funny. And so yeah, it's just it was an iconic book at the time in the 60s because it kind of crystallized this Jewish neuroses that's mixed with humor. What's considered the Jewish humor, which of course these are stereotypes, and not every Jewish person is the same type of humor and all those things. But what became in the popular consciousness of what being a Jewish person is in terms of comedy was kind of crystallized with Portnoy's Complaint.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like
Yeah,
B is constantly fighting his Jewishness, but I have a suspicion that B is Jewish.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe he just doesn't realize it. I don't know, but there's so much Jewishness there, even though he keeps saying he's not. But
yeah,
as a Jew, I can say that. I will move on to my next piece, and this one is actually a song, which is a unique piece. It is Tenacious D's Tribute. Because of course our character B is trying to relay this film that he says is the greatest film, or at least at the very least an absolute masterpiece. And the film that he is remembering is not quite exactly the same thing in any way. It might not be at all the same thing. And of course, that is the theme and story behind the song Tribute from the comedy duo Tenacious D. They are trying to remember the greatest song in the world, but it doesn't actually sound anything like the song that they're currently singing, this cover that they're making, which isn't even really a cover, which
That's
is
really funny.
just it's one of the best funny songs ever.
Yeah, that's a really funny puzzle piece. I hadn't thought about it, but it's so close. That's really good. I
Yeah.
remember discovering that Tenacious D album was like finding a pot of gold. You know what I mean? When you were a kid, yeah, I was a young kid when it came out, and I was like, "This is the greatest thing that ever existed." Is this album so funny and so good? They're such
It
good
is. It's
musicians.
so technically good. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very good musicians. The music is very good. It's one of the only, like, joke albums that I could really listen to it as music.
Mhm.
Amazing. So, yeah, and it's a yeah, and a perfect
Yeah.
example for the
So
book.
good. So what do you got for your next piece?
I'm gonna bring up a great book, of the magical realism genre, which I think, Antkind kinda dips its toe in. You know, we throw words around like absurdist or absurdism as a genre or as a kind of
Mhm.
a subcategory creatively, but I think magical realism is its own thing, and I definitely think that, Antkind fits into there. This is a great book called 100 Years of Solitude, and it's by a Colombian novelist named Gabriel Garcia Marquez, pardon me. And it's again kind of its sheer ambition. There's the character. There's like many characters that have all the same first name, and so you have to read like very carefully as you like who are we actually discussing, because it's like this everyone has the same name, and there's a lot of dream imagery and things of that nature, multiplicity, repetition, again kind of
Mhm.
that comes back even from the Dostoevsky double idea. There's all this kind of lineage from these great books that led to modern magical realism and absurdity, and yeah, so 100 Years of Solitude just kind of again touches on that kind of confusion and repetition. And it's a very good book, classic
Sure.
book.
Yeah, that confusion again, we've kind of mentioned this a few times throughout this conversation, but it really kind of lends itself to this like deteriorating mindset that B is in, where you really are not sure if what he's thinking at any given moment is what's happening or is any kind of a real world, and it just adds to just a general confusion throughout.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's one of the just to touch on the length of Antkind, what I think where it succeeds is that you eventually submit to it. I feel like there's going to be a lot of people that are just going to stop reading it at some point, I imagine.
Mhm.
But if you
Right.
stick with it, because it is very interesting, it's interesting and fun to read. So if you keep reading it, there is just you kind of submit to the idea that you're not going to always understand 100% of what's going on, or where you are in a linear timeline, or if you're in the film, or if you're in his point of view, or if you're in a dream, or if you're in a sub tangent somewhere or whatever. Because there's also like films within the film, and there's dreams within the dreams, because he's in the psychiatrist's office and he goes into his own hypnosis, and then in the hypnosis there's like sub hypnosis and sub dreams at times. So I mean, you can
Mhm.
follow it if you're paying close enough attention, but there is kind of like
Sure.
just handing yourself over to it at some point. And that kind of even goes
Right.
back to Finnegan's Wake, because I just kind of like I accepted that I wasn't going to understand every page. And that's a very
Mhm.
profound lesson, I think, to learn. All people should not bring expectations to the art that they're about to experience. I think if we submitted ourselves more to things, um, I think we'd get more out of them. And this, I'm still guilty of kind of bringing my own preconceived expectations to things, and why I think a second
Right.
time, reading something a second time or watching a film a second time is so valuable, because now I got that kind of crap out of the way and I can just submit more to
Mhm.
what this thing is. So I think the length of the book and the confusion of the book are a tool for us to just hand ourselves over to it.
I think that idea also marries nicely with the fact that we're dealing with a film critic as our main character,
Hmm.
and it makes the decision to have our main character be a film critic all the more important.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that there's a lot there. Like I don't know. I don't know if I mean Kaufman is unique in that he's found such commercial success and he's found such a huge fan base. But I definitely think that he's still maybe it's even a response to the criticism he's received to some more conventional thinking critics, but he's just like submit more. Like this is my fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And why
Right.
not? Why not if you're going to if you're going to show up, if you're going to buy this book, you're going to buy a ticket to my movie. Just go with it. And so maybe
Right.
there's
Right.
he's pleading a little bit, showing us that we're all, film critics in our own way, and we're all
Sure.
coming ready with our pens to make notes about what's wrong with it. So that's
Right.
an
Right. So I only got a couple more pieces here. The next one, definitely too new of a release to truly be an inspiration in any way, but I think there's a thought process that came from some similar place, and that is Alex Garland's TV series Devs that came out last year. Did you watch this?
I haven't watched it. No.
It's very good. I thought, I love Ex Machina. Annihilation, not quite as much. I think this falls somewhere in between as far as his works go. But
Mm.
there's this one idea within the series that I think is also very similar within B's plan to use this one frame from the destroyed film to recreate it by looking forward one frame and back one frame to
Uh-huh.
recreate the whole thing,
Mhm.
and that whole idea is something that is explored in Devs, which I found very interesting then. I find it very interesting now that, yeah, maybe you can't look totally to the future or to the past to try to figure out what came before or after, but one frame at a time seems potentially doable in a current sci-fi way, even though it's also kind of insane in its own thinking and its own
Right.
thought process. But it makes sense though, in a sci-fi way. It does make sense.
Yeah, and this is slightly unrelated, I guess. I don't know, but it made me think of this technology in the camera world that's become a little bit more popular or standard. Basically, cameras now, once they're on, they're recording all the time. And what they're doing is they're just
Right.
dumping frames if you don't push the button to save them. So let's say you
Hmm.
are doing a baseball game and you're taking photos of a baseball game and you miss the contact of the baseball and the bat. If the camera's at least pointed at it, it will actually have caught 4 or 5 frames. And if you push
Right.
that button, it will then go back and save those frames as opposed to dumping them. So you can actually capture time before it happened. You can, as long as it was in the field of view of the camera, it's always on and watching and saving. So I
Yeah.
mean, not quite the same thing, but we're getting to this idea of like
It's in
these.
the same realm, I
It's in
think.
the same realm. That was it kind of floored me. I was like, oh, so the camera's just always recording and dumping, and you can catch moments that you missed, and that's
Yeah.
exciting and terrifying.
Yeah, very much is so, and I think that anxiety that Kaufman has is definitely showing through that kind of an idea. I think he would say he's terrified, on the terrified side of things with that camera example.
Well, it's the same with Alexa, right? I mean, Alexa is always listening, but it only wakes when you
Right?
say the name.
Yeah.
So if it's, I'm gonna trust Jeff Bezos here that he's dumping the information. I'm just comfortable with the fact that I'm boring and nobody cares about me, and all they want to do is sell me
Right.
shoes. So
Yeah.
whatever. So you can listen for 5 seconds, and then like, what are you gonna listen to? What are you gonna save it for? So I don't know. People are insane.
Yeah. No, I agree. So, what do you got for your next piece?
All right, so I kind of alluded to this a couple of times, and it's not nearly as like exciting as it like talking about it before I bring it up makes it seem. It's not like this big revelation or anything. But I kind of wanted to stay away until I got to this puzzle piece about the anger element that we talked about, the frustration element of it. There's a
Mhm.
great novel, possibly one of the top 5 great French novels, especially of the modern century. It's a book called Journey to the End of the Night by a guy named Louis Ferdinand Céline. And it's what's unique about Celine, besides the fact that he was a Nazi sympathizer and a super freak. So as a human being, not good. As a writer, excellent. And we have to reconcile that shit, right? That is not easy. But
Sure.
Journey to the End of the Night made famous Celine's approach to writing, which was to write with all of the anger and bitterness and just nastiness that was this human being's soul. Okay, Celine was a monster, and he wrote that way. He would write using ellipses, the dot dot dots, and what he would do is he'd
Hmm.
write this anger infused sentence, and then he'd write dot dot dot, and then he'd write another anger infused sentence, and
Wow.
somehow would write these beautiful mega works of genius, and yet you felt the rage pouring off the page. It's the angriest read, and he goes on to develop that even more so in his later books, Death on the Installment Plan and blah blah blah. But Journey to the End of the Night made this was his first debut novel, changed modern French literature, and it's a superb book. But what I thought was similar to Antkind is the how palpable the frustration and or rage of the character. It was readable on the page, and I think that
Hmm.
the way that Kaufman did it was an assault of these tangents and asides, and this you kind of followed his stream of conscious kind of brain activity, and it was an onslaught of his anxiety and his trepidation and his self-loathing and his frustration. It was just again more and more and more and more, and so it became claustrophobic. We felt it. Celine did it slightly differently in terms of the actual text itself, but they both have this very palpable frustration and anger to them.
Right. Yeah, I think that it all kind of goes back to something that we've talked about in this conversation about where does B end and Charlie Kaufman begin? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what is actually his thoughts? And I I've seen interviews with him where he does distance himself from the B character. He says this is not me,
Mm-hmm.
but there are certain aspects of it that you have to imagine are him. A more positive note, and not so much a frustration, is that one page that we shared with each other where he's talking about what the cinema experience is and how it's not just the movie. It's what you ate today. It's if you had an argument with your significant other. It's who else
Mm-hmm.
is in the theater. It's all that things like that. I mean, I have to believe are Charlie Kaufman, and hopefully not so much of the negative aspects of the B character are him. Hopefully, not too many of those are, although I'm sure some are. But some of that celebration of movies, I hope, are him.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a slippery slope to assign characteristics of a character to a real person, even if they are
Right.
semi-autobiographical. I mean, it's really unfair because I mean,
Hmm.
just in general, celebrities, we assume we know who they are. Which is a
Yeah.
problem to begin with. And and when someone writes something that is so autobiographical, or Kaufman has made it famous to write autobiographically, it's even harder for people to separate the fact from the fiction. And it's really wrong of us
Yeah.
to just assume certain things, or to really hold that person to that creative standard. I mean,
Hmm.
there might be things about B that are very Kaufman, but does that really make it a representation of him? The answer is no.
Right.
So
And do we need a representation of him in his work? No.
yeah, no. And I think I think we think of like most things, we think of things in too black and white of terms, to where
Hmm.
we have the author that writes what they really think, and then we have the author who writes the exact opposite of what they really think to show you what they actually think. And I think that there's
Right.
overlap there. There's gray there.
Hmm.
You can do both, and I think Kaufman, in his ambition and in his scope, probably ended up doing a little bit of both of those things. He probably wrote things the exact opposite of what he felt to give you a wink, wink,
Hmm.
nudge, nudge of, hey, I think the opposite of this. And then he wrote things that he actually felt, and then he wrote somewhere in between. And
Yeah.
he gave B original thoughts entirely. So we'll never really know, and we can only surmise these things, and we can kind of go with our instincts. But they have to hit a wall at some point, because we can't hold Charlie
Sure.
Kaufman to what we imagine his character, how similar his character is to him. But you're
Sure.
right. I hope the positive things are Charlie, and I hope that the bad things are B. But there's probably
Yeah.
overlap there too.
Right. For sure.
Well, and that's the thing is you hold contradictory thoughts in your head all the time.
Oh yeah.
I mean, but I think things that I don't necessarily believe, right? I can entertain contradictory thoughts. So maybe some of the horrible things they are genuinely from Charlie, but that's not what he's then built into his belief system. These are just thoughts that he's had.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, it's important. It's important to be able to take those thoughts and just, you think them and they're gone, or
yeah.
they come back and then they're gone again, but they're not a part of who you necessarily are just because they cross your mind.
Yeah, there's a therapeutic quality of, I think, of going to that dark place within yourself, and our brains
Hmm.
are pretty amazing places. We can think about a lot of different things or a lot of different scenarios. I think people feel guilty sometimes about thinking certain things. Now, that's kind of
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, we can't really control it all the time. What I think we can control is what we actually put into our philosophy about this life and how we treat others. Those are the things that
Yeah.
we're actually turning into actions and turning into habits. But I've had all kinds of terrifying thoughts that I don't think define me. They're just passing
Sure.
thoughts. And if I hate that part about myself, then I'm just denying something that's real, and it
Mm.
becomes a neuroses. Then it becomes dangerous
Sure.
because I'm denying it. But if I just
Yeah.
catch it and release it, then that's out of my system.
I think from now on, whenever I have a bad thought, I'm going to chalk it up to time rabies.
I think that's a good
Seems,
idea.
yeah,
There's a
seems like a good
gigantic
plan.
ant working backwards. So
Anybody who
stupid.
hasn't read the book is just like, what?
Yeah, which I think is almost everyone listening. Everyone's like, "What the hell
Yeah.
is this book about?" I was gonna say, should we give a little bit more of a linear? I mean,
I mean, it's difficult to do, but I mean, if you'd like to attempt to, I would be happy to hear your, you're trying to, compile what happened in this book.
okay, yeah, I think well, that thing is, it's not gonna do the book justice, but I think that I can
Sure.
explain the general idea. So essentially, a film critic goes to do some research for a book that he's writing, one of the many books he's written on a very specific subject matter. And he ends up
Yeah.
meeting an outsider artist, a filmmaker named Ingo, a 90-year-old black man or middle-aged Swiss man, right? We don't know.
Yes.
And he discovers that this Ingo character has made a 3-month film that he worked on for 90 years. And he commits to watching this film and he sits through it for all 3 months. And when the lights finally come up, Ingo has died. And now he takes it upon himself to make the world know about this movie that will become famous. And but
Hmm.
in the process of getting it back to New York, it burns, and he's only been able to sit through it once. So and it's gone forever. And so now the rest of the book is this quest, and this will lead into my next puzzle piece, kind of this Don Quixote quest to remember the movie frame for frame so that he can not
Hmm.
only bring the movie back to the public's attention, but so that he can make himself famous, which I think is the real underlying drive of this character. He battles that as well, of like what are his intentions.
Sure.
And that's, in a nutshell, without any of the insane tangents, the idea of the book. He's found this great piece of art, he's lost it, and now he's trying to get it back. But because memory is so unreliable, he never knows if he can if something if it's gone forever, maybe it's really gone. Because even if we know what it is,
Right.
it's only from our perception.
Right. And it's colored by our perception the whole
Right.
time.
Which is beautiful. Kind of another little aside briefly is that that's the truth for all things, because films lock in, right? A movie won't change, right? If you watch La Dolce Vita, it's just as many frames as it was in 1960 as it is now, and vice versa. But it will change because you will have changed, and you will look at it
Right.
differently, and you'll grow with it. Great films, like great books, change over time, and they change because you change, and they're about things that are malleable and complex, and that through experience are colored differently. So even a movie, even a film, which will lock in time, will lock in images, and you can't change them, they will still change.
Yeah.
It's profound. That part
It's
of it's extremely profound.
it is. Yeah. That's the exact word I was about to use.
Oh, I stole. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
And
So I
that's my
have
puzzle piece, Don Quixote. By the way, there you go.
yeah, Don Quixote. I will include it, but yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, I got one last piece, and it's a book. I actually have one book on my list here, and that is H.G. Wells' The Time Machine from before the turn of the century, and this book it does go a million years into the future, and things have gotten so weird and so strange and so just downright ridiculous. And I feel like that the way that things happen in the time machine also very much the future is just such a ridiculous notion of what the future could become, as well as going backwards to the past in that case. But this idea of what the future will be is just so out there because it can be within the realm of a book and imagination and all that stuff.
One of the things that really it was interesting to me is that the theory that Kaufman put forth in the book, that the future is written, that the future,
Hmm.
there is a inevitability to what is going to happen, and that is something that I don't necessarily believe personally, but I thought that was
Hmm.
an interesting thing to submit. That like this is concrete, that there's no way to stop it. Even the doctor character that is able to predict the future can only predict himself predicting it. He cannot alter
Right.
the things that he does. And that, again, that kind of thing goes, you can extrapolate out to like, what is our free will? Are we just kind of following our neural pathways? What decisions are really ours? And those are things that we can also really, I think that's not, that's symbolized, that the symbol is the future for that idea that
Hmm.
we live with now. What is really what autonomy do we really have?
Right.
Because I
Right.
don't think Kaufman actually thinks the future is written. Personally, I don't think he thinks that, but I think he's
I
using
highly
that.
doubt it.
I highly doubt it, but I think he's using that as a way for us to examine right this moment. What are we really choosing? Anything? Is it?
Hmm.
Are we kind of robotic in that sense that we're just leaning towards what we're already inclined to do?
I think it also just adds into the thing you brought up earlier about just like a kind of, oh, you want an answer for all this? Here's a ridiculous answer for it all.
Yeah, I think when that's again, this is us extrapolating, but that's again something we do now. I mean, not
Hmm.
to offend anybody, but that's a big part of religion, right? Which is like we don't have the answers, so here's a story that will satisfy some of those questions and will bring people some
Sure.
type of peace. It brings a lot worse shit, but it also brings some peace to some people.
Yeah.
But it's all
Yeah.
worth it for them to be able to sleep at night, right? That's my personal belief. It's not. I'm kidding. Anyway,
Sure.
so but yeah, so that's I mean that's fiction, uh, all great works of fiction, Bible included, provide answers to unanswerable questions. And I think one of the
Right.
postmodern shifts, what's become known as the postmodern idea in literature and in film, is that characters cannot provide answers. They can raise more questions than provide answers, and that's something that
Hmm.
I think has become more common. We've left the romantic period where the good always triumph, and now we're in a postmodern world where things don't always add up, which is a little bit more truer to life.
Right. Well, that was my last piece. Do you have any more pieces you want to bring up?
So I have two quick ones that will actually shift into film and television, and I'll just touch on them very quickly, which is the one
Okay.
film that I think that we can actually think that Kaufman really does admire and that B admires in the book is Jean-Luc Godard's Weekend. He brings it up
Mm.
several times as being a very important film to him. It's Jean-Luc Godard being, the creator and one of the major figures in the French New Wave movement of the 1960s French cinema. And he made a film in the late 60s called Weekend, which was possibly his most cinematic film up to that point. It's a great black comedy and completely absurdist. And I think that must have had a very, very deep impression on Kaufman as a filmmaker, as a writer. And
Hmm.
I think that his references to that film in the book are probably the least ironic. I think he's just saying this is a great film and it deeply touched me. And the B says that, and I
Right.
think Kaufman is saying that. And then the last one, I'll end on a funny one because I think it's very true, is Frasier, my favorite television show after The Sopranos, because of the constant references to the main character having gone to Harvard.
Right. Yeah.
Frasier Crane will use any opportunity he has to mention that he went to Harvard, and so does B. To us, the reader,
Yeah.
not even to characters within the story. But he always
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Harvard, the place I went, and blah blah blah. So I think
Yeah.
Frasier was an obvious influence, and I think that Kaufman probably watches Frasier constantly, like I do, and thinks it's the
Yeah.
funniest show ever written, and and purposely referenced it. This is the theory I'm putting forth.
That's a great piece to close this thing out with. I love it. So I'm going to attempt to do a finished puzzle. I have been writing all these down as we've gone. I may miss something here and there, but we brought up Kurt Vonnegut's books, including Harrison Bergeron, Slaughterhouse-Five, Breakfast of Champions, The Edge, Get a Life, Woody Allen's Without Feathers, Being John Malkovich, Infinite Jest, Adaptation, Finnegan's Wake, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Remembrance of Things Past, Synecdoche, New York, Kafka, including The Castle, The Metamorphosis, and The Trial, Anomalisa, Dostoevsky, including Notes from Underground and The Double, The Critic, Portnoy's Complaint, 100 Years of Solitude, Devs, Journey to the End of the Night, Don Quixote, The Time Machine, Weekend, and of course, Frasier. I got it all in there. A couple of mispronunciations along the way.
No, I think
okay, good. So, yeah, this is quite a list. Obviously, this is going to be a weird episode for me personally, as someone who's not really a reader. I honestly, if I've read 20 books in my lifetime, that's a lot. But
Wow.
I'm very happy to be able to do this episode anyway. And who knows, maybe I'll read one or two of those that you brought up along the way. Hopefully,
Yeah, you should. You really
try.
should. I mean, the thing is, I understand. I
Yeah.
mean, all kidding aside, some of these books, they really are hard, and it's like, I always tell people, don't watch Sallow or 120 Days of Sodom unless you're a real movie person. Then you have to see it. But if you're not, then don't waste your time. If you're a writer,
Right.
then you should read Dostoevsky and Celine and James Joyce, and these are, but for the modern world, those are dedication. You have to really sit down. You have to really dedicate time. And so I understand. I give you a hard time, but I also understand. But I do think that they are good things to do and good things to read, and for everybody. Most of those books are not just for the book nerds or the movie buffs. I think everyone can grow from learning and reading from those books, and they were very influential in my life at a young point in my life, and then going back and reading them again, and they have a profound effect on me, and they make me think about things that I wouldn't ordinarily think about, and so I recommend them to anyone who wants to read them.
Question for you as a big reader. Does Antkind, for all its success and not as much success, does it make you want another Charlie Kaufman novel?
No, not particularly. If he wrote another one, I would read it. But I read the book fairly quickly. I read the book in about 4 days, all total, and it was a big bite, and when it was over, well, here's the thing: I was absorbed in it. So when I wasn't reading it, I wanted to go read it. Like, it really captured my attention and my imagination. I felt like I lived in that really weird world for those 4 or 5 days while reading it, and that was something I was really impressed with. But like I said earlier, when it was over, I closed it, and I haven't really thought about it since. So I'm not hungry for another book. I'm not. It's not like I can't count. I'm not counting the days, but I think that he has definitely a lot of potential to write an even better book, and I will read it when that comes out, because I think he'll do it again. I think he will write it. I think his appetite is now, wet, motivated.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, no. I mean, yes and no.
I think so too. Yeah.
How about you? You want to read another one?
I'm always hungry for more Charlie Kaufman content. I mean, in making my list and like just kind of going back and thinking about his previous films, just the thought came to me again that if you don't count Anomalisa, because that's not something he really planned to make a film, other people came to him and kind of made it. He hasn't gotten to make a movie since 2008.
Right.
Like it's just absolutely a shame. And, of course, next month, we're finally going to get a new Charlie Kaufman movie. I'm thinking of Ending Things, which is coming to Netflix, which I hate that I'm not going to get to see it in a theater, but it is what it is. And,
Right.
maybe you'll come back for that episode, Chris.
I'd love to.
I know
Yeah. I
you
mean,
love
I'm
Kaufman like I do.
Oh yeah, Synecdoche is the best film of the century, I think.
Yeah.
I think from
I'd
the
say it's certainly up there. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's a great film. It's a film that will grow in stature and it will find its audience over time, I think. The issue with
Yeah.
the only issue with Synecdoche is not its complexity, it's sadness. The film is a
Hmm.
sad film, and so it's very challenging to, I think, bypass that. The complexity is fun. I think the average audience member would go on that ride. The hard part to digest is the somberness of it, and so I think
Sure.
it's like Igmar Bergman. You have to kind of be in the right headspace, the right time in your life to get into Bergman, and then once you get in, then it's like, oh my god, this is it has the catharsis of a really beautiful sad song, but it's
Yeah.
also hard work. So I think Synecdoche will find its time and will be remembered fondly because it's a great film.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. So Chris, is there a movie you've watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh man, does it have to be a new one?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, I because I haven't really watched many new films. Because of this quarantine, I'm waiting for theaters to reopen like everybody. I miss it
Yeah.
dearly, and I'm trying to stay up on stuff. But I'm actually working on my own film, which I'll plug here in a moment. But I would say that on the newer films, a couple of years ago, I watched a film called Diamantino, and that is one that I'd recommend. It's a hilarious, strange, kind of a surrealist film, and it wasn't it didn't like blow my hair back, but I kept kind of thinking about it, and there's some really great moments in there. So I checked that one out, and then I recently, just last night, I watched one of my favorite films. I wanted to return to it. Speaking of somber things, the movie called Damnation by the great Hungarian film director Bela Tarr. And Bela Tarr is one of those directors that's like it's kind of like a director's director. He's one of those, even Roger Ebert, like his films eluded Ebert for years. And then he finally got a
Hmm.
chance to like go back and see him. So not everybody's seen his films, and they are definitely worth your time. They are somber and beautiful and artistic, but just undisputably outstanding. And Damnation's one of the shorter ones. It's an easier watch than some of his other kind of like he made a movie called Satan Tango that's like 7.5 hours long, and I love it. I've watched it 3 times, so like I'm a freak. But watch Damnation; it's a little bit easier to digest, and it's a great introduction to his films, and you will be hooked. It's imagine like Ingmar Bergman and David Lynch made a movie together, and that's kind of what you're dealing with Bela Tarr, one of our great modern directors. So
Perfect. Well, Chris, thank you as always for being here. Why don't you tell people about this film you've been working on?
okay, I will. Thank you for asking. So the movie is called Bizzarro e Fantastico. It's an Italian film. Bizarre and fantastic for you guys not knowing the translation. I don't know if you
I was wondering
got that.
about that.
If yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know it's tough, but it's
Thanks.
the title is in Italian because the film is in Italian. Earlier last year around October, I was in Rome and Paris, and I shot a film on location there with some fantastic actors in both cities. And we've been editing it ever since. And of course, COVID kind of shut us down a little bit. But the film is in 2 languages. Neither of them I speak. So that was an interesting challenge, translators and all those things. But I'm very proud of it. The light is at the end of the tunnel, and we're almost finished. We're kind of doing some of the nitpicky edits right now, and we will be hitting the festival circuit with it very aggressively when the film is completed, and it's going to be available online, of course, for everyone to see. So keep an eye out for it. I post often on my Instagram updates about the film. There's a Facebook for the film as well, IMDb, it's on there. But we're getting ready to release a trailer pretty soon, and then we're going to wrap it up and get it out. So Bizzarro e Fantastico, dark comedy shot on location in Rome and Paris, and I'm excited to show it to you guys.
I'd like to think that B would unsarcastically love Bizarro Fantastica.
Well, you never know. I mean, I don't know if that's a compliment or not because he really loves Wes Anderson
Right.
and Judd Apatow. So, no. I honestly, if it's a labor of love. A film I've plugged on here before is Madam X, which is the more larger scope feature film that we're trying to get developed with the wonderful Doug Milsom, cinematographer of Full Metal Jacket, and the support of Mrs. Kubrick, giving her original paintings that were in Stanley Kubrick's films that she's giving them to the production. So some of the things I've been preoccupying myself with is trying to get financing for Madam X. And that's part of the reason I was in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I'm just going to make something and get something fresh and new out there into the world. So the movie is very much a labor of love. It was made on a shoestring budget. It's an ode to many of the films that I love, the Italian cinema of the '60s, and Kubrick himself, of course. He often makes an appearance in my films, as David well knows.
Sure.
But so it's I hope everybody likes it. Of course, you always want your stuff to be enjoyed. But who knows? But I want to give you guys something that I'm very passionate about and hand it over to my audience, and hopefully they enjoy it. Be included.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm glad to finally get you back on the show. And I'm looking forward to the next time we can do this again sometime, or maybe even see each other in person. Maybe go grab some coffee with
That'd be
masks
good,
on or
right?
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I miss being on the show. I've always felt it was a great privilege that you have me on here to co-host, and I really appreciate it. I hope people enjoy it. And I hope people listen to this episode, even though it's about books. So we'll see.
I hope so too. It'll be interesting to see how it goes over. So
no, I'm sure
we will find out soon.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'll be back soon.
Hey, I'm Josh Bell.
I'm Jason Harris. Hey, Josh, we're friends in real life, but we're also co-hosts on this new podcast called
Awesome Movie Year, where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies and do a deep dive looking at movies including the Best Picture winner, the biggest movie at the box office, future cult classics, and more.
Including the biggest flop. And this season, we're doing 1994. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. That could be Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. We're all over the web as well at Awesome Movie Year on all the socials and awesomemovieyear.com. So please like us, subscribe, and if you do like us, give us a 5-star rating because we love you.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Antkind with Kris Krainock. Go seek out that book if you're a fan of all things strange and weird and funny and Charlie Kaufman and film buff jokes and maybe The Critic. I still really like that puzzle piece, using The Critic as a puzzle piece. If you like The Critic, I think you're going to find stuff you like in this book, even though it goes so far in so many weird directions. Maybe you won't be able to catch up with everything going on in it, but I don't know. I enjoyed it, even though it took all of my July from me. I really enjoyed reading it, and I enjoyed talking about it with Kris. So, as always, I want to remind you to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or on Podchaser. And you can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. Join the Facebook group Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about on the show. And a little quick plug for our Patreon, where we have advanced episodes of this podcast, as well as bonus episodes that are coming soon for it, and bonus and advanced episodes for Awesome Movie Year, which just started its 5th season on the films of 1977. You should go check that out. But they have a couple of extra bonus special episodes on the Patreon, and also All Rice No Beans, which unfortunately is going to go on another hiatus because of this whole coronavirus situation, which it sucks, but it is what it is, and we will get that show going again soon. But there is some bonus content that's going to be hitting the Patreon soon, so at least we got that to hold you over, and hopefully we'll be back to recording more episodes in no time. And also my music is on the Patreon. I got bonus exclusive music on there. And speaking of my music, at the time that this is going to go up, my new website is now available. I always play my music at the end of every episode, and I don't know how many of you listening take that as a cue to go check out what I've done. I have all these albums of music and music videos that I've produced for these tracks from the albums, and I've, of course, scored a lot of films as well. If you want to know more about my music composing career, my website is completely redesigned. I just launched it on August 1st. And the website is bydavidrosen.com. That's B as in boy, Y as in yes, David Rosen, spelled exactly the way my name is spelled, bydavidrosen.com. And I completely ground up redesigned the site, and I'm really happy with it. I'm really proud of all the work I put into it. And I am excited to be able to put a renewed focus on my website with the blog and really be able to take it into the next phase of my music composing career, including my next album, which will be coming in October, and I'll be posting more news about that really soon on that new website. So check out bydavidrosen.com. And why don't I close this out with a piece of my music? I guess I should give you a preview of something from said new album. That would be nice, right? What track should I play for you guys today? I'm going to play a weird one to go along with this book. I'm trying to see if any of them are finished yet, the more weird tracks from this thing. I think I'm going to go with a track called The Night Calls. I really love this track. I'm not sure if it's 100% done. It's like 90% done, maybe 95% done. I'm still finishing up this album. I'm going to be working a lot on it over the next couple of months, getting these songs 100% perfect. But this track, The Night Calls, I just think I love this thing. I'm very excited for people to hear it. You're the first people who are going to hear it, other than my fiance Gina. She's heard it, but otherwise it's just been me. So enjoy this. It's called The Night Calls. It's going to be track 2 on my next album, which I'm not going to tell you the name of yet, although you can find it in a blog post over on my new website. But new music coming soon, including this one, The Night Calls.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.